Hi there, I'm Lisa Witherite-Rieg, an osteopathic family physician and the current president-elect of the Pennsylvania Osteopathic Medical Association. Welcome to POMA Does. During this episode, we're going to be talking about volunteering for committees. As we've been discussing during POMA Podcast Episode 3, POMA initiatives stem from the strategic plan based on the 4 pillars: community, communications, influence, and education. Each of the 4 presidents champion a pillar. The work of the pillar, however, is accomplished by an efficient, focused committee structure. Now, some of the more mature POMA members may recall in the past the dozens of assigned committees where members may not even realize they were on a committee. There was no specific charge for many of the committees. Members of the committee didn't know who the chairperson was, let alone other members of the committee. Meetings were sporadic and little, if any, meaningful work was ever accomplished. I'm here to tell you, it's not your grandma's POMA anymore. As POMA has evolved into a truly member-driven organization, your organization, our committee structure has been reworked to provide for efficiency, strong leadership, dedicated Team POMA support, focus, and perhaps most important to me, purpose. Committees are formed by self-nominated volunteers recommended by the president-elect to the Board of Trustees for appointment. It's a 1-year commitment, May to May of each year, with scheduled meetings via Zoom, sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly. There are a few standing committees that meet on a just as needed basis. Students and residents are involved in many of the committees, along with physicians at every stage of their career and many specialties. For situations needing member input, guidance, and specific action, task forces are appointed by the president of POMA. Task forces have a very directed charge and a finite duration. Now, in the near future, you'll get a full listing of POMA committees along with expectations, and that will be in an email called Call for Volunteers. At this time, I'd like to introduce some of the POMA members who are serving on task forces and committees and have them talk about their experiences. Let's start with you, Christine. Tell us who you are, where you're from, and share what committees or task forces you're involved with.
Sure, thank you. My name is Christine Rohanna. I actually am a member of District 8. My practice is family practice in a rural health center in Carrolltown, Pennsylvania. Been in practice I'm coming up on my 10th year, and currently for POMA, I am a member of the House of Delegates. I've been a delegate for District 8 since 2018, continuing to present. I'm also a member of the Mentor Task Force, so I'm involved that way. When I was a resident, I was the resident representative for our region. And so I've pretty much been involved with POMA since the beginning of my career.
Excellent. Tom, tell us a little bit about you.
Good evening. Yeah, my name is Tom Dardarian, Thomas Dardarian. I'm a general OBGYN from out in the main line of Philadelphia. I've been practicing for, 16 years in the area. Did my residency at Pennsylvania Hospital. We'll throw a little plug in for myself. I was actually the first DO to graduate from Pennsylvania Hospital's residency. So that's a big accomplishment in residency. I still live in the area, still live in the main line. I live right now in a place called Paoli, Pennsylvania. And I serve as the trustee from District 2. I also sit on the executive committee. I am the Eastern representative to the executive committee for POMA. I also am a delegate to the House of Delegates. I sit on the government affairs committee, and I am a past chair of POMPAC. I really fall under the influence pillar, which I guess we'll talk about a little bit about later, but that's sort of where my real passion lies, I should say, is in the influence pillar.
And Jim, share a little bit about yourself and what your involvement is.
Thanks for having me. I'm Jim Latronica. I'm also an osteopathic family physician. I did my residency at Clarion Hospital in Clarion, Pennsylvania, and then I did a fellowship at Penn State in addiction medicine, which is what I do clinically full-time at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine academic appointment as an assistant professor of psychiatry and family medicine, work in Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, member of District 8. So full-time clinically, behavioral health and substance use disorders. Not what I envisioned when I started medical school, but I landed right where I need to be. Previously, I served on the Grant Development Task Force, which has become a sort of revamped grant review committee. Talk about that exciting process later on. And I'm also on the Government Affairs Committee, which suits my specialty very well because the intersection between politics, policy, and medicine is always significant, but especially in the substance use disorder sphere, it tends to be a little more acute. So that's currently my role with POMA.
Great. Thank you so much all for being here. I want to talk a little bit about one of the things that often deter people from getting involved, and that's the time commitment. So let's start with Tom. Can you share what type of time commitment your participation for the committees and the task forces has been? And did you understand those expectations at the time of your application?
Sure. So I started initially more in the national level. One thing I didn't mention is that I am a past president of the American College of Osteopathic Obstetricians and Gynecologists. And what I quickly realized was that, yes, there are things you can do nationally, but there's a lot more or greater impact that you can make local. And so I had an idea of, what time commitment it was going to take to be on committee. So I did come in sort of eyes wide open. But I can tell you, for me, for the Government Affairs Committee, we meet once a month, and it's for about an hour to an hour and a half. And there is some reading to do prior to that you can do on your own time. They're very good at getting bills out early. And I would say, and Jim will go into this a little bit more, but I would say probably we do maybe about 20 minutes or 30 minutes of prep work, depending on the bill. I must admit that if something is in the opioid sphere, I do defer to my colleagues who know a little bit more about it. For me, when it comes to reproductive rights, they defer to me when it comes to those types of things. Depending on what topic we're talking about, there'll be a little bit more, a little bit less. In terms of the executive committee, those meetings, they're quarterly, they range in time. They are a little bit longer, but they're great meetings that are full of collegial interaction where we get a lot of really good work done. So those will take a little bit more, I think a couple hours, but again, they're only quarterly. And then as a trustee, we meet, 4 times a year. And those are half-day sessions, but those are, again, very collegial, a great time, wonderful to reconnect with old friends. So I don't know if I really look at that as a time commitment, more so as just a wonderful experience.
Yeah, Tom, that's been my experience too when we talk about our governance meetings. I look forward to those. Jim, your time commitment for the foundation, task force for the grants, and the government affairs.
It's a little less straightforward than the Government Affairs Committee, but in a way more, I don't want to say more exciting because they're equally exciting, but there was some listeners will be familiar with I mentioned the revamping of the grant process to be more streamlined, to potentially be a little broader, to draw in some atypical or submissions that maybe we hadn't expected before. And that was a huge, huge process. I was happy to be a part of it. I have to give credit to Dr. Pam Goldman, who ran that and has been doing so. And staff in general have also been amazing. Diana Ewert comes to mind immediately, but there are certainly others. So the time commitments there, my involvement started right at the beginning of COVID. I was just alerted that the video is still up. Supplies seem to be in short supply, asked for funds to 3D print some masks, evolved into a project. And after that, they asked me to stay on for the grant development task force. So over the next year or so, the idea was make the application easier, broaden the scope potentially, and align it more with the POMA pillars. Meetings weren't monthly or even necessarily every other month. We had sort of spurts of activity. Some of it was hurry up and wait just because of the nature of doing this type of work. I would say it's probably similar, if you average it out, if the Government Affairs Committee, which I agree, hour and a half meetings, it probably averaged about the same amount of time. I've never felt overburdened in any of these committees or that so much was expected of me. And like Tom, I've been on the board of the American Osteopathic Academy of Addiction Medicine. So I had national background first. And similarly, I thought, well, it was very nice of them to give me some sea legs, so to speak. But once I knew I was going to live in Pennsylvania, I figured I should be a little more involved with my home organization, so to speak. Having that background and seeing positions that we take on national issues, I encourage it, but also at home where you're practicing medicine, and I was not prompted to say this, it really has never felt like work. That's part of the appeal, I think, is you get to know people, they have similar interests, and they're coming together, they're giving their time. It's never felt like work, it's never felt like a burden, and I would say probably the task force, before it became a review committee again, I don't know, maybe over the course of the year plus, I spent 20 to 30 hours total between various things. And it was never all at once. And it was never, you must get this out. So very reasonable in terms of time required overall.
I do want to say, Tom and Jim, welcome home. Christine, tell me about your time commitment and the expectation.
Sure. Yeah, I think everybody's been very clear about what's expected, which is always great. So you're not getting, oh, hey, look, you've been added to this committee. You can have a chance to find what your passion is. And everything's very well spelled out now about what we're supposed to be doing, how we're going to accomplish that, and what our end goal is. I didn't have the national stuff, but I did have a subspecialty. So I do a lot of work with POPs, with the family practice subspecialty here. So I come from a lot of committees there. Right now with the mentor task force, it's about an hour, usually more like 30 to 45. It's averaging out to about once a month at this point. But there's also a lot of things that we're working on. And a lot of it is, mentoring between attending physicians and students and residents. And so it's always kind of finding the balance between how can we get things out to the students that won't interfere with exams, or how do we get to the residents before they need to sign contracts? How do we talk about all that? Our meetings are maybe not constantly at one time or, always the third Tuesday of the month, but they average out to about monthly to every other monthly. And really, it's about 30 to 45 minutes a time.
So I'm going to jump back to Jim, because we were talking about a really big accomplishment, the granting of foundation grants. Is there anything specifically that you've helped your committee or task force accomplish that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I wanted to real fast make an interesting point, because Christine had mentioned, not having that national background first. Alternatively to her, who had involvement from med school on, I did very little of that in med school or residency for whatever reason. Seeing these two paradigms, I think, is important, because if I had heard this when I was in med school, I probably would have said, not for me, not interested. But later on, if you don't have the time or you have other interests, I think that's fine. But keeping in mind that you don't have to be involved with medical societies from your first day of medical school to make a contribution later on. That's sort of on a personal note for the past version of me that may be listening in some other timeline. The grant committee itself, it was a super interesting experience, because when you think about giving away money, essentially is what we were doing, it is a lot more complicated than one might expect for various reasons that won't be interesting for this podcast. But between POMA and the POMA Foundation awarded our first grants. We awarded 2 of them, generally well written. That's part of the learning process, though, with this committee. It is really a unique skill set and a learned one. There's nowhere in medical school or residency where you're really going to learn unless you're doing K or R grants with the feds. And even that is a little different than foundation endowments. I think the fact that it's happened, that it's now replicable and scalable, unless you were part of it and saw what it was before, it's kind of tough to describe how monumental it was. I have to thank Dr. Goldman again. I don't have any idea how she wrangled this all together in such a short time.
It actually wasn't a short time, Jim. Pamela's been working on this for years.
A short time, I should have said, yes.
I will tell you the joy on her face at our last board meeting, our foundation board meeting, when it was approved to sign those checks. So kudos to you and everybody that served on that force along with Pamela. Christine, is there anything specific you have helped your committee do?
I don't know that I've necessarily helped come up with ideas. We do have some really great, like I said, student involvement, which is very nice and interesting to see how perspectives have changed. So again, just slight backtracking. Even saying I was involved from med school, don't get too impressed. It was kind of in the old guard where it was like, congratulations, you're on this committee. But it's interesting to see now how much involvement starting in first year, second year. I was just trying to get through class. These students are beyond. They're looking towards the future and so involved. And to help them kind of establish what it is that they need and what would be most beneficial has really been very surprising. The things that I don't feel like I've been out in practice that long, but the things that I felt were important maybe aren't necessarily important or as important anymore. So I think kind of helping to bridge what has been thought up by the students and asked for by the residents, and kind of being able to make that connection happen has been really very fulfilling on my end.
Tom, tell me some of the things that you've helped your committees do.
That's a great question. I guess the first thing I would say, I think as far as I know, on the Government Affairs Committee, I'm the only women's health OBGYN on the committee. So again, I think it brings a perspective to when we're looking at bills and things of that nature. That's the one thing I do love about our committee is that we are represented from different subspecialties. Everybody gets an equal voice. There's not a situation where it's dominated by one person. And it's interesting because we're also a mixture of people who work in academic medicine, and I happen to work in private practice. So I look at bills one way versus someone who looks in academic medicine looks at bills in another way. Also, some of us are in rural practice, some of us are in a more urban setting like myself, look at bills differently and how that's going to affect our patients or our practices. I guess the big thing that I would say that I bring then is a women's health suburban/urban perspective. So that's one thing. And then the other thing was really has to do with sort of, again, my passion on just reproductive rights and women's health is that I've spent a lot of time in the lobbying space. And when I first came on, I was asked to do some work with POMPAC as well. And I really felt like that was a great place where we were able to really make some great inroads with state senators and state representatives and really bring POMA, along with Mr. Sandusky and our lobbying firm and some of the past presidents, Dr. Goldman as well. Again, she was very instrumental, and Dr. Battistelli. We've had some great inroads there. That's really what I was able to bring, to bring some of my national experience in lobbying and bring it down to the state level. And again, nothing more than just full acceptance from POMA. I also do want to touch on what everybody else just also said is you'll know when it's the right time. Again, I came out, I went national first and came back to local. Some people did start out as a medical student and work their way all the way through. And some people just find their way. And it's never too late to join. It doesn't matter how long you've been out in practice. It's just a desire. If you want to give back, it's a great place to give back.
I want to touch on one of the committees that I serve on. I serve on the curriculum committee. And anybody that has gone to any of our POMA conferences will vouch that it is just high level education. And in the past year, POMA has obtained the ACCME accreditation status. So now the credits that you get from POMA are not just accredited by AOA or ACCME. And one of the things that is so important about that is for our osteopathic physicians that are certified by allopathic boards, our credits are relevant. So the curriculum committee that I sit on ensures that our presentations are based on sound medical judgment and standard of care. And that is very, very endearing to me because of my history in medical education. I always say I'm a retired osteopathic family physician and a recovering family medicine program director. And Jim, that's probably the reason why you weren't involved in POMA at an earlier age, because I was not your program director.
It really is true though, right? It really is. It always starts from, when you're a resident with your program director, right? Did they get you involved? Did they show you what's important? That yes, you do have to, obviously we're practicing medicine, right? You have to know everything about that, but the physician-patient relationship does sometimes extend outside of the walls of the exam room. And that really can be an advocate for your patient, not only in the office, but outside of the office.
And that physician-physician relationship and that camaraderie that you get interacting with your colleagues from across the state in different specialties and in different areas is just so endearing to me. So any last thoughts that any of you would like to share with our listeners who may be considering volunteering for a committee?
Yeah, well, first let me say, back when COVID started, actually, you were one of the first people I reached out to. It wasn't the AMA or even AOAM that I was reaching out to. I emailed you, and then you got me in contact with the POMA Foundation, and then I stayed on with the grant committee, and then I joined the GAC. So in a way, what you're describing is exactly, even though it wasn't when I was a resident, it was that Pennsylvania physician to physician, who can you count on when the chips are down? So credit there for you.
The circle of life.
Yeah, really. I mean, I didn't really put that together until you mentioned that. Yeah, my advice would be there are very limited number of visiting rotations for students. So sometimes, especially for osteopathic medical students, that can be difficult. They have to apply early. They have to compete with this VSAS or whatever it's called now, this application. And one way to get in with a medical society or a specialty group or just get some exposure if you're interested in policy or advocacy is this way. And I don't mean just as a CV building exercise. If you do committees just for that, you're probably not going to get that much out of it, but you do get real tangible outcomes. Affiliation with the Government Affairs Committee. I'm now the public policy chair for the Pennsylvania Society of Addiction Medicine. Without that experience, learning how to talk, keep in reserve some of my more passionate emotions at times, I probably wouldn't have continued on. I would say that in a way, in terms of your education, getting involved with POMA and your colleagues who are in various specialties and learning just how to talk with other physicians and legislators and the public in different roles. And if you don't like it, you can quit after a year and try something else. It's low risk, high reward, I would say.
Right. Christine.
I think the beauty of the pandemic, and there really isn't any, but the fact that it's a lot more flexible now when we have all of these Zoom meetings. I feel like I can personally contribute more time than I could have before, rather than driving across the state or, meeting places. So I think, that should not preclude anybody from finding their passion. You can't complain about things if you're not also willing to be a part of the change. My program director always said, you can come to me with a problem, but you should have an idea of what the solution is too. And I think by joining these committees, you have a chance to be part of solutions for things. And that's just perpetuating our profession down the road.
Tom, what wisdom do you want to share with anybody who may be considering volunteering for a committee?
Yeah, so I think you hit it earlier when you said this is not your grandparents' POMA anymore. And I hope I'm not going to offend anybody out there who's listening, right? But it's not, right? It really, really isn't. And, sort of to what Christine said, right? It's, again, I'll take it back to what I do best, which is if you don't vote, you can't complain, right? So if you're not involved, you can't complain. If you want to make a change, you need to join. And I will tell you, and again, I know it's going to sound cliche, but it's a big tent and everybody's welcome in the tent at POMA. Honestly, I mean this. I never thought I would make the friends that I have made. I cannot tell you, I'm 51 years old, right? Who really makes friends at 51 years old? I now have friends that are from an hour north of Pittsburgh that I would have never come in contact with. And again, I've learned so many things. I'll be honest with you, like scope of practice as an OBGYN is not really a big thing on our radar. But I've learned that really for a family practitioner of an internal medicine doctor, scope of practice is huge. And I've really gotten to appreciate different viewpoints and different things that are out there. So I would say that if you are thinking about doing it, give it a shot, bring a friend, or if you know somebody that's there, you come with them. I'll say to Chris Davis, who I knew back when we were in medical school together, Donna Delphin, who was a couple years younger than me. I kind of snuggled up next to them when I first showed up and was like, okay, I'm here, like, take me under your wing. And it's been one of the best experiences. I can honestly say that I do not regret this decision. And if you're thinking about joining, come find me. I'm more than happy to sit next to you and make sure that you have a good time while you're there. And again, you will not be disappointed. I guarantee it.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for your candor and your input. And I want to thank all who serve on POMA committees and task forces. We want to continue to keep POMA on the move, and we truly are a vibrant and different organization from years gone by. We'll only continue to grow with your fresh ideas, your input, and your diversity. We're looking for osteopathic physicians and physicians in training at all stages of their careers, all specialties. We're looking for students, residents, young physicians in practice, the more mature physicians, and even retirees, especially those who may have never participated in POMA activities in the past. We need and we want your energy. Later this month, all POMA members will receive an email called POMA Call for Volunteers. Please, please consider submitting your name, your interest, and any experience that you may bring to be considered for an appointment, recommendation to the Board of Trustees for appointment to a committee. Also, I want to remind members that have served on committees, even if you have served on that committee for years, you still need to respond to the POMA call for volunteers. So on behalf of myself, the rest of the presidents of POMA, the Board of Trustees, and all osteopathic physicians throughout the state, help us keep POMA on the move. Thank you, and thank you for listening to POMA Does.